This lesson is on evaluating piecewise functions. This lesson is to evaluate piecewise function using function notation. Remember, we learned about function notation in semester 1, such as evaluating f of 4, f of 3, and so forth for any kind of function in function notation, such as f of x or g of x. Some of the vocabulary we're going to learn is piecewise function, function notation, and the domain of a function. Look at our first example. Given this piecewise function below, I want you to evaluate the following. So notice, let's first identify some key parts to this function. We have three subdomains. Any value less than -1, so any value we want to evaluate less than -1, we're going to use the function x squared minus 3x. And any x value between -1 and 3, anything greater than or equal to -1 and less than 3, we're going to actually use this subfunction of 2x minus 1. And for any value of x greater than or equal to 3, such if I wanted to find f of 4, f of 5, f of 10, and so forth, we're going to use this subfunction of -3x. So let's take a look at our first example. If I wanted to evaluate f of 0, the first thing you want to look at is what's inside the parentheses. Here it's x equals 0. And then you want to think to yourself, what subdomain does this satisfy? Well, notice 0 is strictly between -1 and 3. So the subdomain that satisfies is this one, which pertains to the subfunction of 2x minus 1. So that's what we're going to sub 0 in for, 2x minus 1. If we sub that in for x, we get an answer of -1. And that's our answer. F of 0 in this case is -1 for this piecewise function. Let's take a look at the next one. If I wanted to evaluate f of -4, which subdomain does this satisfy? Notice how x equals -4 satisfies the subdomain of x less than -1 because a -4 is less than -1. So in this case, our subfunction we're going to use to sub in for x is x squared minus 3x. So let's sub in -4 in for x, and we simplify, so it becomes 16 plus 12. We get an answer of 28. So our answer in this case, f of -4, is 28 for this piecewise function. I want you to try the next one. See if you can evaluate f of 3. So pause the video and attempt this. Which subdomain does this satisfy? You're right. It actually satisfies the last one. Anything greater than or equal to 3. So even if it equals 3, we're going to use this subdomain. And anything greater than 3, we're still going to use the subfunction of -3x. So that's what we're going to sub 3 in for -3x. And if we sub that in for x, we get an answer of -9. So our final answer is f of 3 equals -9. Let's take a look at our last and final example, which is different from the last one. Here we're given a graph of a piecewise function, and I want you to evaluate the following. So let's first take a look at f of 5. And again, remember, the idea of it is when x equals 5, what's our output here? Well, when x equals 5 is a vertical line, right at x equals 5. So we're trying to think of where does this vertical line hit and intersect the piecewise graph. If you notice, it intersects right at this point, and that's at y equals 1. So our answer is 1. F of 5 equals 1. Let's take a look at the next one. If I wanted to evaluate f of 1, again, that's a vertical line right at x equals 1. So where does this intersect the piecewise graph? Notice how it passes through this open circle right here, and it doesn't intersect the piecewise graph until down here, where it's the closed circle part. That's right at the value of y equals -4. So our answer for this one is f of 1 equals -4. I want you to try this one. Pause the video and see if you can evaluate f of -6 and see if you're correct. When we're evaluating f of -6, we're thinking about when x equals -6, which is again a vertical line. Where does this intersect the piecewise graph? At this point, which in this case is y equals 4. So our answer for f of -6 is 4. And let's do the last one together. Evaluating f of 0. When you're evaluating f of 0, you're thinking to yourself, when x equals 0, what's my output? Again, that's a vertical line right at x equals 0. And where does this intersect the piecewise function? Right at the value of -2, y equals -2. So our answer is f of 0 equals -2. Tomorrow we're going to get some practice in actually evaluating these piecewise functions for graphs or in function notation. But for now, I want you to try the questions below in the Google form. Hope you enjoy your night.